Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I really appreciate y'all watching. Make sure and like and subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. Now, this is our Guns 101 section, and so for those of y'all that have been watching, we just kind of cover some real basic fundamentals for those of you that are trying to get started into kind of your firearms journey, so to speak. And so what I wanted to do this video on was terminology specifically. So what do these things mean that people start using within the kind of the gun community, right? It can get a little bit overwhelming and confusing. Just like with any new industry you join, right? There's lingo that's involved within that community, and what exactly are they talking about? So we're going to dive into this. This is not a super technical definition stage of this. We're just going to kind of go over some general overviews on it, but we'll apply them in practicality, how these things are actually used, right? Which is, if you're a more experienced gun owner, you're going to say, well, that's wrong, that's incorrect, right? There is a difference between those two things. Sure, absolutely, but the simple fact is from a practical, a pragmatic approach, a lot of these things don't actually have much different use. And so we're going to talk about where those technical definitions and the pragmatic definitions actually kind of vary and where they come together and everything. And so we'll dive into some different definitions today. Like I said, this is a very wide range of definitions for the industry as a whole. Okay, so the first definition on our list to go over is actually the slide stop or the slide release, right? You will hear this one a lot. So the slide stop, slide release is obviously this button here. This is what allows my slide to go forward, and it's the lever that holds my slide back when I expend that last round from the magazine. That slide will lock back because that magazine pressure of the magazine spring is actually pushing up on it. Some guns, you'll see that they have ambidextrous slide releases where you'd have one on either side. So that's for left-handed shooters to be able to hit that slide release rather than having to do it with their finger, which is what they oftentimes will do. They'll hit it with their index finger or they have to rack the slide. This gun, the P365 series, does not have an ambidextrous slide release. I don't know if they make one. I'm not aware of any models that do, but you can see like the new Glock Gen 5s all have ambidextrous slide releases. For right-handed shooters, it's kind of a moot point. Not important to us. For left-handed shooters, it does make a difference on what pistol you get. Now, you will hear a huge issue and debate about whether it's a slide release or a slide stop and whether there's a huge difference in these two and what the technical definition of a slide release and a slide stop is. Here's the reality. A slide release and a slide stop is technically different based on the manufacturer. A slide stop is not meant to be hit with your thumb and releasing the slide forward, right? A slide release is. A slide release, if I hit the slide release, all it does is, and you can see I'm using my thumb to block that because I don't like slamming my slide forward on an empty chamber. Another big kind of, especially with 1911 shooters, something you definitely don't want to do. But anyways, that slide release that's really the difference. A slide stop just stops the slide, and when we release a slide stop, technically, we rack the slide. When we release a slide release, we can use the slide release or we can rack the slide. It's kind of up to you. And so that's really where your differences come with those two. Is there a practical, pragmatic difference between them? Not really. They work identical. Basically, a slide stop is usually just a little bit smaller and a little bit harder to hit with your thumb. Like Glocks, for example. Glocks typically are going to use something like a slide stop, but a lot of people will replace those with a true slide release. Again, I don't want to go too far into the technical definitions of these. Pragmatically, they're the exact same thing. So don't dork out on it. Don't let people try to make you feel stupid because you didn't know the difference. It's completely irrelevant. They work and they function identical to each other. The magazine pushes up on the slide stop or the slide release and effectively does the exact same thing, both of which you can hit with your thumb. Just slide stops are a little bit smaller than a slide release, okay? So don't get too into the weeds on that. Now, the next thing to discuss is ported barrels, compensated slides. What's all the difference here, right? Now, a ported barrel simply means that that barrel would have holes drilled into the top of that barrel. Now, you can't just go drill them in there with a drill press. They actually have to be drilled around the lands and the grooves that are inside the barrel. But you have to drill, what they do is they drill holes into there and it forces the gas upward, forcing the muzzle downward. So when you fire your gun, it helps reduce the recoil. A compensated slide, a little bit different. A compensated slide will oftentimes have a ported barrel, but then the slide is cut. A ported barrel can extend past the end of my barrel, and the ports can be out here past the end of the barrel, or it can be here inside the slide, like you can see on this one. This one does not have a ported barrel. This one has a compensated slide because the barrel does not come all the way to the end of the firearm. The barrel, the compensated compensated slide on here allows that gas to escape. The downside to ported barrels is that ported barrels will sometimes require higher pressure rounds or higher velocity rounds to actually reliably cycle that slide. They can be a little bit more finicky on ammo, so they tend to be a little bit more common in competition guns rather than defensive guns. Compensated slides or compensators that are added onto the end of a firearm typically don't have that issue, and so the only thing that you lose is you lose sometimes the length of the barrel, or sometimes you have to gain onto the slide, right? Like if you're adding one to the end of the slide, like an aftermarket variant or something like that, and so there's a size gain there from the barrel to the slide and everything, depending on how that gun is set up. And you can see my gun, I use a compensated slide, not a ported barrel, because this is a carry gun, so I don't want to have reliability issues. But at the same time, I like, especially with a smaller gun like this, I like it to remove a little bit of that snappiness from the pistol. Now, let's talk about practically. Do compensated slides and ported barrels make a difference? Absolutely. If they didn't, nobody would be using them, especially in the competition world. Question is, do they make enough of a difference, right? Well, in my eyes, any advantage I can gain is probably a good advantage without sacrificing the reliability of my firearm, right? I don't want to sacrifice any reliability that I can avoid. Now, every gun is a compromise, even Glocks, right? Glocks, most notoriously the most reliable semi-automatic pistol that you can get. But we have sacrificed some form of reliability to have a magazine, an increased magazine capacity, detachable magazines, a semi-automatic pistol. Because if we truly wanted the most reliable pistol, it would be a small bolt-action pistol, right? That would be the most reliable gun. It'll always pretty much go bang. And so that would be more reliable, but it would obviously be slower. It wouldn't have a magazine and all these other issues that we don't deal with. So the more moving components we add, right, the more reliability issues we run into. So the same thing holds true with ported barrels and compensators. You do tend to run into a few more reliability issues. However, you don't run into reliability issues with a compensated slide like this. The downside is I do have a shorter barrel. So those are your kind of two differences, right? Ported barrels means the barrel is actually drilled. Compensated slide, it's actually in the slide. They both do the same thing. They push down on the front of the barrel as that round is fired to avoid some of that recoil, that felt recoil in the firearm, allowing you to have faster follow-up shots. So that way, my second and third shots, my splits may be, instead of 31/100ths of a second, 21/100ths of a second, right? Because I can speed that up just a little bit. That makes a difference specifically in competition, where you're talking about 1 second over the course of 12 stages can make the difference between first and fifth place at those higher levels of the competition. And it certainly obviously makes a difference too in a real world self-defense environment, because if I can speed that up, then at that point in time, right, that 100ths or 10/100ths of a second may make the difference between him getting off another shot or me getting off another shot, right? So there is some advantages there. But like I said, there are also some downsides. You do sacrifice a shorter barrel and stuff like that. And so you kind of have to weigh it. Which one do you want? Which thing is more important to you? Do I want a longer barrel or do I want a compensated slide? To me, a compensated slide is a little bit more ideal for a carry gun. But I like my compensators to be built into the slide, like this gun here, which takes away some of the options for manufacturers, because a lot of them, they don't have a factory option. You have to have a comp added later. So it just kind of depends on the gun. A quality built gun, right, it's not near as important. As we go up in the quality of the firearm, so you start looking at like custom guns like Nighthawk Customs and Ed Browns and Wilson Combats and stuff like that, then it starts coming down the benefits of it, but they still do benefit. And that's because the tolerance are tighter, the gun weighs a little bit more, the gun design is generally a little bit higher end, right? And so the weight is a little bit more balanced in there, so the felt recoil is not near as high as what you would think. Give you an example. A friend of mine shoots for the Nighthawk Custom team. I was shooting his, he's got a 2011 that he shoots for the Nighthawk Custom team. And that gun has probably the lowest felt recoil of any pistol I've ever felt and that I've ever fired. However, that gun does not have a ported barrel or a compensator on it, right? So it's just simply the high quality nature of the manufacturing of that firearm that does that. Okay, so those are your big differences between a compensator and a ported barrel. Again, pick which one you want, but I would not personally use a ported barrel on a defensive carry gun. I don't like them because I don't like that finickiness of the ammo selection. Not all guns have that, right? And they're typically going to be a little bit more less finicky if you buy them that way from the factory, as opposed to having that done later. hand loads, reloads, factory reloads, or factory ammo. What's all the difference, right? So hand loads and reloads effectively refer to the same thing. Hand loads and reloads are simply just let me readjust my holster here. Hand loads and reloads are simply the identical thing. All they are is somebody has purchased a press at their house and they reload their own ammunition, right? So they have a nice fancy press setup that allows them to chug out ammo. I'll put a clip of mine in here so y'all can see what that actually looks like. All right, so y'all can see this is our brass feeder here. So this is a electronic device that orients the brass correctly, drops it down this tube, and then at that point in time, when we pull up on this lever, it feeds one into the decapping and resizing die. At that point in time, that decapping and resizing die pushes the primer out of there and then rotates it around for another primer to now be seated in the bottom. So I'll go ahead and show you the bottom of that. So you can see we've got a new primer down there in the bottom, and the old primer has been pushed out. Now at this point in time, the next pull of my lever is going to activate this hopper here. This is where our powder is. So it fills that up with powder, okay? And then we move on one more step here. Now the next pull of the lever will actually put this through this die here. All this does is it flares the neck of that case a little bit so that I can fit that bullet in there a little bit better. It makes it easier for the reloading aspect of it. Then I set my bullet on top of there, and you can see we've got our little bullet here, and I've just set it right on top of that. Now the next die that is going to go through is going to push that bullet down on top of there and seat it at the correct depth inside of this. And you can see each one of these bullets now is getting a function done on it. So once you get the first 5 done in here, then after that, it actually pushes out a bullet every single time I press down on that arm. And so you can see now behind that, right? So I just seated another bullet on top of that casing. Now the last die that this is going to push through is actually going to crimp that brass down just slightly around that bullet. It holds the bullet in there now, so the bullet won't actually fall out right when we're messing with it or loading it or putting it in cases or whatever it is. Okay, and then now it drops it out into my little tray here to actually get it ready for going into whatever range assembly I have. At this point in time, we have taken a piece of empty brass and turned it into a bullet. It's a cheaper way of manufacturing ammo, where if I were to buy 9mm right now, 9mm floats around 30 cents a round for cheap, target grade 9mm. However, I can reload 9mm for about 17 cents a round. Not a huge deal if you only shoot 100 rounds a year, but when you're an avid competition shooter shooting 10, 20, 50, 100,000 rounds a year, or you run a school like we do, where we go through, I don't even want to tell you guys how much we go through because people find it hard to believe, but we go through a lot of ammo, not just for us, but for our students as well. Now we don't reload and sell to our students because you have to be a federally licensed reloader to do that. That's where we move into factory reloads. Factory reloads are effectively the same thing, right? We take the spent brass on the ground, it is put into a press, a new primer, new powder, and new bullet are seated on top of that. You save yourself the cost of the brass. All you have to do is collect it. Factory reloads are a little bit different though, because factory reloads typically, I don't want to say they're more reliable, but they're more reliable on the spectrum of the whole, right? Because when you reload ammo, if I reload ammo, my ammo is really reliable because I've tuned it. I make sure that it runs on all my guns just fine, right? Because we use that for classes. I don't want a bunch of malfunctions. We use it for our training, our classes, as well as our competitions. And so I want to make sure that my ammo is very reliable. But Joe Schmo, John Smith, whoever is reloading ammo, I don't know their quality standards, and so I may get double charged rounds. I may get a round that's a squib load because there's no powder in there, which is another definition, right? A squib load. All this is a round that generally doesn't have powder or enough powder, and it doesn't push the bullet all the way out of the barrel. It's called a squib. It's a very dangerous condition because if you fire another round behind it, you can blow up your barrel, you can damage your barrel. There's lots of different things that can happen. You can blow the slide off the guns. There's lots of damage that can happen to your firearm and to your hand or your body, right? So squib loads are very dangerous. And so because of that, that's why you have to be licensed to be a reloader. Now, a reloading license, so a factory reload, all that is somebody has purchased a license, set up a commercial shop where they're doing reloads, and they do it the exact same way that we do it at home, but again, they just have a higher standard that they're held to. Whether it's better ammo is up for discussion. Then your factory ammo, these are not reloads, right? Factory ammo is 100%. The factory has built everything. They ordered brand new brass, or they made the brass themselves. They ordered primers, or they made the primers themselves. They ordered powder, or they made the powder themselves. And at that point in time, they have made the factory ammo from the ground up and done everything that they can to kind of control that quality. That's where we get new load factory ammo from. Okay, so what do you want to use for self-defense? Only ever factory ammo, and presumably some type of self-defense rated round. I typically use Hornady Critical Duty. There's lots of good ones out there, but Hornady Critical Duty is my favorite because I like the ballistic testing on it. A number of reasons that it's a topic for a different video, but that's generally what I use. But for self-defense, only ever factory ammo. We never use even factory reloads or reloads because there's no ballistic data on them. And the issue that we run into is if we have to use our gun in a self-defense situation, the argument will be made by the prosecution that you have used a super high velocity, high killing, high lethality round, and you simply have no way to refute that argument. Even if you loaded just cheap target rounds with as minimal powder as you could, there's no way for you to refute that claim, okay? Because there's no ballistic study done on the reloaded ammo. So for self-defense, always, 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 without exception, factory loaded ammo with ballistic testing behind it. All right, so your magazine well is simply the place where you stick your magazine in the bottom of the gun. What a flared magazine well is it's usually an attachment, though some guns have them built in internal, but it's typically an attachment that comes on the bottom and extends that mag well out. The downside to that is it makes the gun a little bit thicker, and so sometimes it can be a little bit harder to carry. I wish I had mine. I've got one ordered for this gun, but it's on back order. I'm waiting for it to come in. It's not too much harder to carry. You'll find that people that wear more form-fitting clothes, like women, typically have a little bit harder time concealing something like that. Guys, it's usually not such a big deal for us, but what it does is it speeds up the process of that reloading, because when I'm trying to find my magazine well to stick that magazine in there, I can find it faster and get that magazine in there, right? So it gives me a little bit wider tolerance on moving that magazine into the bottom of the gun. And so there is an advantage there. There is a speed advantage. This is why they're used at the highest levels of competition. Is it a huge advantage? Not necessarily, but if it saves me 5/100ths of a second finding my magazine well, over the course of a competition, again, that can add up to, by the time you've done your competition, you may have 20 magazine changes in there. That could be the difference between first and third place, first and fifth place, whatever it is. And again, certainly could make the difference in a life and death situation. Now, I use all my guns for defensive carry as well as I do for competition. I don't have specific competition guns, so if it's set up well for competition, then it ends up being set up well for self-defense simultaneously. I don't plan on changing magazines for self-defense because there's just not a lot of areas where civilian engagements have gone to a magazine change, though it does happen. It is certainly rare. However, remember that I'm a private security contractor. We work overseas, we work stateside, we do high-risk stuff, and so because of that, my chances of doing a magazine change are a little bit higher than the average citizen, so I add in a flared mag well to a lot of my pistols when it's appropriate to that specific model of pistol. Some models of pistols that I have just don't have good quality aftermarket ones, so I don't have one on there, but the simple fact is, if I can put it on there, I generally like to have that flared mag well on there. It is a beneficial feature. Okay, so one of the more confusing things is actually the caliber of the bullet. What do these calibers mean? You have 9mm, 45-70, 30-06, 12 gauge. What the hell does all this crap mean? Well, simply it's a measure of the size of the bullet as a general rule, but it all comes from different settings, right? Different SAE settings, different a caliber is simply just 1/100th of an inch. So that's obviously an SAE measuring tool versus 9mm being a European measurement. But then we start talking about things like 380 auto. Well, 380 auto is not actually 38/100ths of an inch, is actually 356/100ths of an inch, right? So it's like, how the hell do we get all this? A lot of this is just developed over time as rounds have changed, as we've made updates to them. So like a 45-70 used to actually have three numbers there, where you had one number was the grain, one number was the bullet caliber, and then one number was the amount of black powder that actually went behind it, measured in grains. And then all that's changed, and we dropped off a number, so now we just call it a 45-70 instead of like a 45-70-200 or whatever the hell it was. And so all this has just changed over time, but the simple reality of it is it's just a way of measuring the size of the bullet. So don't make it super complicated. If you have questions about a certain one, which one's bigger, which one's smaller, just go look it up and compare them. It's not, you'll start to recognize it soon enough that a 9mm 9mm is bigger than a 380 auto. They use the same size bullet, but they use a different size casing on there. And so you'll start diving into that. But again, don't dork out on it too much unless you're really into ballistics and you really want to start reloading. When you start reloading, that's where you got to figure it out. But just understand what your gun is rated for, what caliber it uses, and then drive on. And again, for self-defense purposes and even for modern day competition purposes, there's really nothing better for a 9mm for human-to-human self-defense, for competition that allows us effective training with reasonably priced ammunition. It just seems to be the better option. So most self-defense gun you're going to find in some caliber of around 9mm, and that's going to be pretty universal now. There used to be a lot of debate on 45 versus 40 versus 9mm. There just really isn't anymore. Most people have swapped over to the 9mm. Now, continuing on with our caliber discussion, we need to really talk about bullets and what do all these components mean. And I've seen on CNN where they show the diagram of the bullet leaving the barrel, and it shows this whole little brass casing and everything flying down the barrel and leaving. And the reality of it is obviously those people don't understand anything about firearms, because this is not what leaves the barrel, right? This is the piece that leaves the barrel. This little itty bitty bullet, right? That's what actually comes out of the barrel and goes into your target. That whole casing there, all that does is hold the powder and the primer together in one nice component. You can see this is an empty casing. This is what the powder would get loaded into. And then on the back side of that, we have our primer that plugs into the bottom that is detonated by the firing pin hitting the primer. And so those are kind of your universal terms on this, but the bullet actually refers to this piece here coming out. When somebody says a bullet, that's what they're talking about. That's the bullet. When somebody says shell or a casing, it's the brass casing that everything is combined in. When they're talking about powder or primers, it's the detonation components within. When somebody uses the term shell, though, shell can also mean the whole bullet. A lot of times you'll hear that more commonly where people will call it, hey, how many shells you got, right? They're asking how many loaded bullets do you have ready to go. But the correct term for this would be like the ammunition, right, or the cartridge. This is everything combined into one. But shell can, like I said, can be a little bit universal. Can either mean the actual shell or the full bullet. But as a general rule, we'll call these shells empty casings, right? Casings, spent brass, right? Anything like that. It's going to be referring to just the actual spent brass that comes out of the gun after the round has been fired and is now inert, basically, okay? So those are kind of your differences on those. Again, this goes, there's a lot more technical things, and you got to look at a little bit more technology with it. When you start diving into the reloading aspect of it. But this is kind of a general overview. And I'm not a reloading expert, so I don't do reloading videos. There's plenty of them out there. If y'all need to find some reloading videos, there's lots of people that are much more qualified than myself to tell you exactly what you need to do. Okay, what's the difference between clips and magazines, and what other terminology revolve around our magazines? So this is a constant issue that comes up on our range. Newer shooters will call these clips instead of magazines. And the reality of it is, does it really matter? No. I don't beat people up over it. Truth, I don't really care. The simple fact is that a magazine and a clip, pragmatically, they end up kind of being the same thing because people use clip incorrectly all the time. But what a clip technically is for older firearms, like antique firearms, World War II firearms, stuff like that. And it's actually a metal strip, and I don't have one to show you because I don't have any guns that use them, but it's actually a metal strip that holds the bullets on there. You feed that into the gun in some fashion. Some guns require you to stick the clip in there and then you press the bullets down. Other guns will allow you to actually feed that clip directly in, and then it'll pop it out on the last round. So it all just kind of depends on the specific firearm and how that works. Now again, I don't use any guns that use clips, so I don't have one to show you. All my guns use modern day magazines. A magazine is a device that actually holds the ammunition. That magazine feeds into the gun. They are typically reusable. Clips, though, can be reused or not necessarily reusable, and they only have a fairly limited life expectancy on reusing because they typically don't use springs. Instead, they use like pieces of metal that have been bent over, and so you'd have to bend that metal back. Again, lots of different ways depending on the model of the antique firearm, but it's not something that we use in current modern firearm usage. Clips are kind of obsolete. Everything done now is a magazine, which is what this actually is. So again, I don't care when people use it incorrectly. It doesn't bother me, but a lot of people get really hard up on it and they want you to use the correct terminology, and that is what it is. And so simple fact is that this is a magazine. Magazine for modern day firearms is generally going to be the correct terminology for it, not a clip. Now, the next thing on our list is still with the magazines. Is this a a high capacity magazine, a normal capacity magazine, a low capacity magazine. What's all the difference? Where are the numbers? Where's the definition? So I'll go ahead and tell you, within the gun industry, within the gun culture, there is no difference, right? We call a magazine a magazine. We do not use the term high capacity magazine. That is a term coined by gun grabbers only. These are normal capacity magazines. This is a 17 round capacity magazine. The gun grabbers would call this a high capacity magazine. Now you can see how small a gun this fits into, right? This is not a particularly large firearm. This is a 6 Hour P365, which is my new favorite carry gun. That is a normal capacity magazine. However, because a lot of states have banned anything over 10 rounds, they consider anything over 10 rounds to be a high capacity magazine. There is no technical number there, because in a state that said maybe a 7 round magazine limit, they would consider anything over 7 rounds a high capacity magazine. Everything else is just a magazine. There's not really any such thing as a normal or a low capacity magazine. We use the term normal to normalize these. This is a normal capacity magazine that we now use to counteract the gun grabbers' language on that, right? So this is not a high capacity magazine. This is just a magazine. And so there's no difference there unless you're in a state that likes to ban your freedoms. Okay guys, thanks so much for watching. I'm gonna leave y'all with that. There is a ton of terminology. Like I said, we could make this video 3 hours long and still not cover everything. So we'll probably do another one. If anyone has any questions about different terminology or anything, just post it down in the comments. I'm happy to answer it. Maybe we'll make another video on the combination of those comments as well. But this is your general firearms terminology. So this is our first lesson in Firearms 101. These are the things that I see probably have the most questions regarding them when people come out to classes or come out to the range. So again, thanks for watching. Make sure and like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and we'll catch you on the next one.